She said approving my idea might ruin her career. I said losing it might ruin her heart. The office was quiet in that strange, suspended way it only ever is after dark. The hum of computers still alive, the city lights stretching like veins beyond windows, and the faint scratch of her pen moving across a page that could change everything for me. I stood there, leaning against the frame of her door, my proposal folder tucked under one arm. She was my boss, Elena, 42, poised in that effortless way that made people step aside when she walked down a corridor. Tonight, though, her hair had come loose at the temples, a few strands escaping the twist she usually wore it in, and her shoulders held the kind of tension that even a well-tailored blazer couldn't hide. "I'll regret this," she murmured at last, not looking up. Her voice was low, almost as if she were telling it to herself. I should have stayed quiet. I should have let the moment slide into a polite yes or no. But something in her hesitation made me want to reach past the formality. Maybe it was the late hour. Maybe it was the way the city looked when it reflected in her eyes. A world full of risk and possibility. "Not half as much as you'll miss it," I said. The words left my mouth before I had time to sand their edges down. They weren't rehearsed. They weren't careful. They were a challenge, soft but sure. And in the hush of that office, they sounded louder than I intended. Her pen stilled. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to me, and for a moment, it wasn't the look a boss gives an employee. It was the look a woman gives when she's caught off guard. Curious, maybe even intrigued. The air between us shifted then, imperceptibly, like a door that had been closed for years, suddenly finding it wasn't quite latched. I walked toward her desk, laid the folder down, and tried to make my hands seem steady. "It's not about the numbers on that sheet," I added, softer now. "It's about the way people will feel when they see it succeed." Her fingers lingered on the edge of the proposal. Just a brush of her nails over the paper, but somehow it drew my attention more than any signature would have. The scent of her perfume, subtle, clean, something with cedar and faint citrus, drifted across the desk. She leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other with that composed elegance she wore like armor. "You're bold," she said finally, and I couldn't tell if it was praise or a warning. "I've been told I'm persistent," I replied, allowing a small smile. The clock on the wall ticked past 8:30. The office outside her door was dark now, emptied of the usual noise. It felt like the whole building was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would write on that final line. When she finally signed it, the click of her pen felt like a starting pistol. And though we both said nothing more as I left, I knew we had crossed an invisible line that night. Not in ink, but in something quieter, a moment that would come back to echo in every glance, every pause, every almost said word that followed. The next morning, the office felt different. Maybe it was just me carrying the echo of what I'd said the night before. Or maybe she felt it too, the invisible thread that now hummed quietly between us. The corridors buzzed with the usual clatter of heels and muted conversations. The coffee machine hissed in the corner, sending up curls of steam that clung to the cool air. But when she walked in, Elena, there was a moment where everything around her seemed to pause. Her presence always had weight, but now I was acutely aware of it, as though that single exchange had tuned my senses to her frequency. She stood at the head of the conference table during the morning briefing, her blazer sharp, her hair tied, with more precision than the night before. Her eyes scanned the room as we each gave her updates. I kept my voice even, my gaze respectful, but when her eyes met mine, it was different, not lingering, not obvious, just steady and softer. It lasted only a heartbeat, but it was enough to send a flicker of warmth through my chest. When the meeting ended, the usual shuffle of papers and polite nods carried everyone toward their desks. I gathered my notes, deliberately, neither rushing nor lingering. She stepped past me near the door, holding a folder, her scent trailing like a whisper, the same cedar and citrus I remembered from the night before. "Report," she said simply, her hand extending without looking. I passed it to her. Our fingers met, not clumsily, not entirely by accident either. Just a brief connection, the side of my thumb brushing the curve of her knuckle. Warm, steady. She didn't pull back immediately. For the smallest second, the touch held, a shared pause in a crowded hallway. I looked at her then, and she glanced up, lips parting slightly as though a word had formed and dissolved just as quickly. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm but quieter than usual. And then she moved on. I stood there a moment longer than I should have, the corridor alive again with the sound of ringing phones and hurried footsteps, yet none of it felt as vivid as that simple brush of her hand. It was nothing, really, the kind of contact that happens a dozen times a day in any office. But when something as simple as skin meeting skin carries meaning, it stops being nothing. Back at my desk, I caught myself glancing at her office door more than once. Through the glass panel, I saw her settle behind her desk, pen in hand, expression unreadable. But once, just once, she looked up, and our eyes met through that pane of glass. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The acknowledgement was in the look itself, a silent, "I remember last night, too," though neither of us would ever say it aloud, be why the time the rain began to trace silver threads down the windows, most of the office had emptied. Desks lay in neat, abandoned rows, chairs pushed in with precision. The only sounds were the faint hum of the ventilation and the distant, uneven patter of rain on glass. I stayed behind, working through a stack of revisions that didn't really need finishing tonight, but I wasn't ready to leave yet, not while the memory of that brief touch in the hallway still lingered in my chest like a steady pulse. When I finally stepped out of my office, I found her in the break room. Elena. She was sitting at the small round table by the window, a mug of tea cradled between her hands. Her jacket hung over the back of the chair, and for once, her posture wasn't the picture of control. Her shoulders slightly rounded, her gaze fixed on the rain-slick streets below. I paused at the doorway, unsure if I should disturb her, but she turned her head slightly, just enough to catch me in the corner of her vision. "Still here?" she asked, her voice carrying the faint rasp of tiredness, not command. "Finishing up," I said, stepping inside. "You?" She exhaled a small laugh, not amused, more like she found her own answer ironic. Same story, different decade. There it was again, that subtle reminder of the years between us, not said cruelly, just matter of fact. I pulled out the chair opposite her, leaving enough space to keep it safe, but close enough that the warmth of her tea reached me across the table. "Long day?" I asked. She stirred the tea absent-mindedly. "Long year." Something in her tone wasn't about the office. It was about the weight she carried, the choices, the late nights, the way she held an empire together while the world expected her never to blink. "You ever think about walking away from all of this?" I asked. She looked at me then, really looked, and for a heartbeat I saw the woman behind the title. Tired, sharp, still undeniably strong, but no longer unshakable. "More than I'll ever admit," she said softly. The rain picked up outside, streaking the glass with rivulets that caught the city lights and fractured them into ribbons of gold and white. We sat in that glow, the silence between us less awkward now, more like a pause that belonged to both of us. I didn't touch her. I didn't say anything daring this time. I just let her speak about the project, about the sacrifices she made climbing this ladder, about how sometimes she wondered if her life had become a series of signed approvals and polite smiles. And in that quiet, over a mug of cooling tea, she let me see her, not as my boss, but as a woman who had built walls high enough to touch the ceiling and was now, for some reason, letting me glimpse the space between the bricks. IT was just past 3 in the afternoon when the tension in the office spiked like a sudden storm. A client call had gone badly. One of those conversations where no one is truly at fault, yet everyone feels the weight of it. Voices were raised behind closed doors, deadlines shifted like fragile chess pieces, and through it all, Elena held her composure like she always did. At least, that's what everyone else saw. I saw more. She emerged from the conference room, a thin folder clutched against her chest, her jaw set tight. The hall was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that follows a room full of people realizing they've witnessed their leader take a hit. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she made her way past a row of desks. She didn't look at anyone, not even me. Something in me moved before I had time to think. I followed her. She stopped near the tall window at the end of the corridor, the one that overlooked the river, and stood there, staring out as if the water could carry away the pressure building in her chest. I approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Rough call," I asked gently. She didn't turn. That's one way to put it. For a moment, I just stood there beside her, close enough to hear the way her breath came in, measured but a little too measured. Her fingers tightened around the folder. And then I did it, something that crossed a line, yet felt less like breaking a rule and more like answering a silent request. I placed a hand on her shoulder. Not firm, not claiming, just enough pressure to say, "I see you. I'm here." Her muscles tensed under my touch at first, the way someone instinctively recoils from being seen when they're trying so hard to remain composed. But then she didn't move. She let out a slow breath, the kind that leaves a trace of fog on a winter window. "Everyone expects me to have all the answers," she murmured. "They don't need all the answers," I said quietly. "They just need to know someone cares enough to try." Her head tilted slightly toward me, the barest motion, but I caught it. I felt the subtle shift of her shoulder beneath my palm. A small surrender, almost imperceptible. We stayed like that for only a moment more, but time has a way of stretching when it matters. When she finally turned her head, her eyes met mine. Not cold, not guarded, but searching. There was no smile, no dramatic confession. Just a softening, the kind that made the hallway around us disappear for a breath. "Thank you," she said, and this time it wasn't polite. It was personal. I lowered my hand, the warmth of her shoulders still echoing in my fingertips, and stepped back before the moment asked for more than either of us was ready to give. The days that followed felt strangely hollow, as if the air between us had been rewound back to before that quiet moment in the hallway. But not quite. There was something different now, not in what was said, but in what wasn't. She kept her distance, not coldly, not with the sharpness of rejection, but with a precision only someone like Elena could manage. Her emails were brief, her tone neutral. In meetings, her gaze would move past me quickly, landing on charts and faces and everything that wasn't mine. I told myself I understood. After all, she had more to lose than I did. A reputation built over 2 decades, a team that watched her every move, a board that trusted her to keep her world spotless. And me? I was the ambitious one who had dared to reach across a line that wasn't supposed to be crossed. But understanding didn't make it easier. There were moments, fleeting ones, when I caught her looking. Once in the elevator mirror, our reflections stood side by side, and I saw her eyes soften for the briefest second before she looked away. Another time, she brushed past me in the corridor, and her hand almost reached for the edge of my sleeve before pulling back, fingers curling into her palm. The sound of her heels, usually crisp and confident, began to feel like punctuation marks in a sentence I couldn't finish. Top, pause, top, fade. I tried to focus on work, revisions, proposals, endless data that had no warmth and asked no questions. But even in the clatter of keyboards and the low hum of office chatter, I found myself listening for the door of her office to open, for the slight change in the room's rhythm when she stepped in. Was it something I'd done? Or was it exactly what I'd done? The hand on her shoulder, the words that lingered longer than they should have? People noticed, I think, though no one said it aloud. The atmosphere shifted when we entered a room together, not dramatically, but like the faint change in pressure before rain. I remember one particular afternoon, walking past her office with a folder in hand and seeing her through the glass. She was on a call, expression calm, pen twirling slowly between her fingers. For a moment, I thought she might look up. She didn't, and that, somehow, said more than words. Distance has a sound. It isn't silence. It's the echo of what used to fill the space between two people. I told myself I'd wait, that I wouldn't push, that if she needed to step back, I'd give her room to breathe. But late at night, staring at the city lights from my apartment window, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important. The business trip was supposed to be routine, a 2-day conference, a client dinner, a string of polite conversations under warm hotel lighting. But routine has a way of becoming something else when the right silence hangs between two people long enough. That evening, the hotel lounge was half empty, a low hum of distant chatter filling the spaces between soft piano notes. The carpet muffled footsteps. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee and rain carried in from the street. I had finished my notes early and found her already there. Elena, sitting near the window with a single glass of red wine in her hand, the city's neon bleeding into the glass like liquid light. "Long day?" I asked, pulling out the chair beside her. She gave a small smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Is there any other kind?" We spoke at first like colleagues, about the presentation, about the client's demands, about the quiet relief of being away from the constant office rhythm. But the conversation drifted, as it had a way of doing with her, from safe topics to real ones. She told me about the years it had taken to get here, the dinners she'd skipped, the birthdays missed, the expectations carried like weights disguised as milestones. Her voice stayed even, but her fingers kept tracing the rim of the glass, over and over, like the motion was keeping her steady. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked quietly. Her eyes met mine then, not sharp, not guarded, just tired in a way that only honesty brings. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but regret is dangerous, isn't it? Once you start naming what you missed, you start realizing how much of your life was spent pretending you didn't want it." The words lingered between us, heavier than the music, heavier than the rain tapping the windows. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just let my knees shift under the table, brushing hers, light, unplanned, but not unwelcome. She didn't move it away. "You're afraid," I said, softer than I meant to. "Of what?" "Of wanting something that isn't in the plan." She let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "You think this is about a plan?" "No," I said. "I think it's about what happens when someone finally makes you stop following it." Her hand rested on the table now, close to mine. Not touching, but close enough that if either of us shifted even slightly, the space between us would disappear. She looked down, then back at me, her voice barely above the music. "This could cost me everything." I didn't try to argue. I just held her gaze and said, "Or it could give you back something you didn't know you'd lost." For a long moment, we stayed there, 2 glasses half finished, 2 lives too carefully drawn, leaning toward a choice neither of us had spoken aloud. That a week had passed since the hotel lounge. A week of deliberate calm, where we both moved carefully around the unspoken thing between us. Work went on, emails, meetings, decisions. Yet something had changed, and it wasn't in the tasks we handled. It was in the way we carried them. The morning sun spilled through the blinds as I walked into the office. The city outside was awake and restless, but inside her office, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that waits for a beginning. She had called me in early, her message short and simple. "We need to talk." Elena stood by the window when I entered, her blazer off, her blouse sleeves rolled just past the elbow. The light caught the faint lines near her eyes, the ones you don't notice until you see someone not as they are for the world, but as they are when they stop performing for it. "Close the door," she said softly. I did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The blind swayed slightly in the draft, scattering sunlight across the floor like stripes of pale gold. She turned, leaning against the windowsill, arms crossed loosely. Not defensive, more like someone steadying themselves before the first step. "I've thought about what you said," she began, her voice calm but quieter than usual. "About wanting something that isn't in the plan." I waited. Her eyes met mine, steady now, not searching, not avoiding. I've spent a long time making sure everything in my life stayed contained. Predictable. Respectable. And now I realize I'm tired of pretending I don't notice what's been right in front of me. The words didn't come with a dramatic gesture. No sudden movement to close the space between us. They came like a door being unlocked. Not thrown open, but no longer closed. "I'm not asking for anything reckless," she added. "Not here, not where people are watching. But I don't want to keep pretending this isn't real." I stepped closer, slow enough that every sound in that room felt like it echoed. The creak of the floorboard, the soft sweep of fabric as her hands lowered to her sides. "Then we don't have to pretend," I said quietly. Her hand lifted, hesitant for the first time in all the weeks I'd known her, and rested lightly on my forearm. Not a pull, Not a claim, just a touch that said, "This is where I am, if you want to meet me there." The city beyond the glass kept moving. Horns, lights, the endless rhythm of other people's lives. But in that room, it felt still. "We'll take it slowly," she said, her thumb brushing once against my sleeve. "Outside of this place, away from the noise." And for the first time in a long time, the weight in her shoulders seemed to ease just slightly. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise wrapped in fire. It was quieter than that, and far more real.